For more on the U.S. strikes in Iraq and in Syria, I'm joined now by retired Admiral James Stavridis, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander and NBC News Chief International Analyst, and Bilal Saab, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. So, Admiral, I want to start with you. What was your reaction to these initial retaliatory strikes, and did they go far enough?
I think they did go far enough, Yamiche, for where we are right now. What the administration hopes to do is kind of control this ladder of vertical escalation. So they started a couple of months ago with individual strikes going back against the place a drone might have come from. That clearly was not having sufficient effect. Then the Red Sea kind of kicked in. So now what we're seeing in the wake of the deaths of 3 American servicemen and women is a larger campaign-like series of strikes, really round numbers, about 100 targets up north in Iraq and Syria, and about 50 in and around the Red Sea. So it's a volume increase, and it has also opened up to go after Iranian Revolutionary Guard, who are embedded in some cases with these proxies. So I think these strikes are calibrated. Let's see what happens over the next week or so. I think they'll continue unless we see a cessation. At the end of all that, the administration will have a tough choice. If this does not have the desired effect, then you have to start thinking about going after targets in Iran. That's going to be very challenging in a number of ways.
And Bilal, I mean, as Edmund talking about these being calibrated and really being very strategic, what do you make of the locations of these strikes? Are they strategically significant when you look at the locations of all of these strikes?
Really sitting here in Washington behind my desk. I mean, typically after such strikes, you do what we call, and I'm sure Jim knows about this, you do a battle damage assessment, the fancy words for, we just basically assess the efficacy of the strikes. And given that these have been pretty extensive, it might take a little bit of time to figure out really what we hit and how strategic and how effective those are. I'm pretty confident that the U.S. military and CENTCOM in specific has done those things. I'm not sure if they will release them or they'll release parts of them, but it's, I think, premature to say if they've been strategic or significant. I agree with Jim, this is going to have to be a campaign. This is a process. I don't think we're going to be anytime soon significantly degrading the capabilities of the Houthis, especially in the absence of a parallel effort to deny them the supplies. It's one thing to actually degrade the existing capabilities of the Houthis, another altogether to cut off their supply lines, and that's going to require a whole lot more than U.S. air power. You need an interdiction regime at sea that goes into cutting off the supply lines of the Houthis, which are not insignificant.
As you say that, Admiral, I wanted to ask you about something that's playing out in Washington, D.C. There's some back and forth over whether the U.S. gave Iraq a heads up about these retaliatory strikes. The White House is now walking back what it said about pre-notification. How significant is that? And what does that mean for our relationship with Iraq if there's this back and forth going on at the White House?
Well, it's always complicated when you are going to launch a strike and you are going to move fighter aircraft or even cruise missiles or drones over the airspace of a sovereign nation. It's a judgment call. Ideally, you would give notice, particularly with Iraq, a nation with whom we have good relations and have been cooperating. Unfortunately, the flip side of that is there are elements in the Iraqi government that would put it on a fast pipeline directly to some of these militias. So it's very complicated set of calculi to make that. I do want to pick up on a point Bilal made a moment ago about an at-sea interdiction. That is correct. It is complicated. There we would have to try and bring more of our allies into this because you wouldn't want to try and do that just with the U.S. I've tried to do those blockades and interdictions. They're complicated and very warship intensive, should we say.
And Bilal, I want to ask you about something else that happened last night. We saw a drone attack on a base that houses U.S. troops in Syria. Given that, did the U.S. strikes really do anything to restore deterrence in the region because we saw that?
Yeah, obviously not the first time we see such strikes against U.S. personnel in Syria. And there are I would say in a pretty vulnerable position there. Obviously, our top priority over there is force protection. I don't think we have a whole lot more leeway, frankly, there than what we have with the Houthis, given the very challenges that Jim described, which are very accurate. The fact that we have a very I would say, challenging political relationship with Baghdad, the political sensitivities that the Iraqi government has to deal with. In Syria, it's more of an issue of, frankly, resources. And whenever you need more resources, therefore, you're going to have to bring them somewhere else. And that somewhere else, if it is a priority theater for the United States, and it's going to be really challenging a case to make, be they from the European theater or the Indo-Pacific theater. So are they going to deter them? No, I don't think so, frankly. But the best thing we could do to try to achieve that effect is to continuously degrade the capabilities. Therefore, the effects of those strikes become a little bit more muted. This is what we call deterrence by punishment.
Interesting, deterrence by punishment. And Admiral, officials have told us that the U.S. response could last weeks. So looking into the future, what do you expect here? And how soon do we think that we could see even more kinetic strikes?
I think you'll see more kinetic strikes in a day or so, assuming the attacks don't simply stop, and I don't think they will. This will have to go a couple of rounds. And then I think it'll probably be at least 7 to 10 days of additional strikes. We need to do two things here. Create deterrence in the minds of the mullahs in Tehran. That's very hard to measure, let's face it. But we need to Bilal's point, we need to degrade the actual capabilities. The thing in the middle that we've been discussing, cutting off the supply chains, is going to be crucial to making this work over the longer term.
Boy, critical conversation. Thank you so much, Admiral, and thank you so much, Bilal, for sharing your thoughts.